The Science Guy.
Science rules. Inertia is a property of matter.
Hey, what you watching?
Paper cuts. I'm getting paper cuts between the webbings of my fingers and the webbings of my toes. There's no good way to do it.
Yeah, no. So just deal with it. Take a breath.
That hurt, didn't it? That's because you have access to theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to predict and explain others' behavior based on their minds, their thoughts, motives, and feelings, even though you don't actually feel or think what they do.
Theory of mind is essentially the ability to shift perspective to another person or understand that other people can have different thoughts, beliefs, desires, feelings from the self.
The Sally-Ann test is a classic test to check for the ability of theory of mind. We have Sally, and we have Anne. Sally has a book, and she hides it in her box. She leaves. Anne takes Sally's book and puts it somewhere else. When Sally returns, where will she look for her book? If you have theory of mind, you'll correctly answer that she will look in her box. That's because you are aware that Sally has her own mental state along with her own set of beliefs.
This may seem like an arbitrary aspect of the human condition, but ToM is important in many social interactions and cognitive processes. Just ask an expert.
The theory of mind is just the assumptions you're making, which are driven by all sorts of things, prior knowledge, memory, and also the environment and situation you're in. Theory of mind is really the attributions you're making about the nature of whatever it is that you're interacting with. Sometimes yell and scream at your car or other people. So a lot of this happens fairly automatically.
ToM is affected by social environment, family structure, and surprisingly, hormones. Hormones such as testosterone and oxytocin play a role in the development of ToM.
Now, let's talk about oxytocin.
Oxytocin is a neuropeptide hormone synthesized by the hypothalamus, specifically the magnocellular cells of the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei. After synthesis, oxytocin is stored in the pituitary gland until a signal occurs, causing it to be released into the bloodstream. Oxytocin is well known for its physiological function regarding lactation and uterine contractions during labor. However, it also has a role in behavior by exerting psychological influence, particularly with bonding, trust, and social cognition.
The current molecular explanation involves the role of dopamine and glutamate. The overactivation of the mesolimbic pathway is related to glutamate hypoactivity, which leads to decreased GABA function. The result is less inhibition of dopaminergic neurons. It has been noted that oxytocin interacts with dopamine in the mesolimbic system to facilitate reward and addiction. It may also have a role in social behavior.
Though hard to create an animal model of schizophrenia, behavioral assays have been used to assess social interaction. One study showed that prenatally stressed rats had decreased interactions with other rats compared to rodents not exposed to stress. These effects were reduced with oxytocin administration in the central amygdala.
Schizophrenia is a mental disorder characterized by both positive and negative symptoms. The most notable signs of schizophrenia are the presence of hallucinations and delusions. Negative symptoms refer to the absence of normal function, that is, emotional deficits and an inability to infer others' mental states.
Research shows that the social deficits seen in schizophrenia are presumably due to decreased oxytocin. One experiment measured plasma oxytocin levels, then measured facial affect discrimination tests. There was a positive correlation between oxytocin levels and the ability to correctly identify facial expressions.
So does this mean we can use oxytocin to treat schizophrenia?
Well, while the studies show that oxytocin does play a role in theory of mind, it is important to consider the limitations of these experiments.
Some of the complications with the diminished plasma oxytocin study include that the menstrual cycle phase and sexual activity of the participants were not taken into account. Keeping record of these subjects' menstrual cycle phase and sexual activity would allow for a closer regulation of oxytocin levels and allow researchers to accurately take stock of how much of this hormone the subjects were really being exposed to. So, some of the problems associated with the effects of a single dose of oxytocin study are that the subjects were tested in a small group of all males, which we've already learned a representative sample does not make. A future study that may elucidate the effects of oxytocin might be the use of functional imaging techniques to monitor oxytocin-dosed individuals performing socially cognitive assessments.
Hey Hunter, let's talk about testosterone.
Okay.
During the 7th week of development, the HPG axis becomes activated. This causes the hypothalamus to release a hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone. This hormone is then secreted onto the anterior pituitary, where it stimulates the production of LH and FSH, which then are secreted into the circulatory system, traveling to the gonads, where it will stimulate the production of testosterone. Typically, we associate testosterone with the development of secondary male sexual characteristics and its role in mediating reproductive behavior. High levels of fetal testosterone are positively correlated with restricted interest in boys. They're also inversely correlated with social behaviors such as eye contact and reduced peer relationships in preschoolers. These high levels of testosterone contribute to these abnormal behaviors that are often commonly seen in autistic children.
So autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So autism spectrum disorder is characterized by deficits in social communication and also restricted repetitive behaviors and interests. So social communication includes things like verbal communication, nonverbal communication, ability to make friends and keep friends.
What happens when you give an autistic patient a false belief test like the Sally Ann task?
But they'll show kids like a box of that should have candy in it and they'll ask the kid, what do you think is in the box? It's Smarties. And then they open the box and there's pencils in the box. And then they put the pencils back in the box and then, oh, well, when your mom comes in here, what's your mom going to think is in this box? Smarties or pencils?
Yeah.
A kid with adequate theory of mind understanding will say, well, they're going to think that there's Smarties in there because that's what I thought before I knew.
Yeah.
But a kid without theory of mind, usually kids with autism, will say pencils.
In a study by Peking University, women with high levels of plasma testosterone were more likely to have children who later on go to develop autism, while high or low levels of estradiol did not matter across both groups. This could be due to the intrauterine environment or the biochemical interactions between mother and fetus.
As wonderful as all these studies are, we have to, as scientists, acknowledge that every single research project or study has inherent complications, caveats that make the inclusion of information suspect. In our case, in many of these studies, we've documented what it is that makes them a little bit weak in terms of using this data for generalized assumptions. In the case of the fetal testosterone and empathy study, the fetal testosterone levels were measured and taken to be representative of the total amount of hormone to which the fetal brain was exposed. But this assumption was not verified due to the rigor of doing so. Prenatal experience was unaddressed, but was assumed by the researchers to have greater implications in terms of empathetic behavior. Some of the limitations of the Mothers of Autistic Children study include the fact that the blood samples were collected years after these women were pregnant with the autistic children. In future research, it would be beneficial if blood samples could be taken during the pregnancy term to ensure that a representative analysis of the fetal developmental environment was taken into account.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed our brief informational video on hormones, theory of mind, and empathy. Have a great rest of your quarter.